So very good morning. Today we'll discuss Unix socket core functions here. So in this we'll discuss two types. One is connection oriented, one is the connectionless socket functions. First we'll discuss what is the connection oriented. So we can see the system calls at client side as well as the server side here. Socket, bind, listen, accept, read, write and close system calls can be seen in the server side, as well as the socket, connect, write, read, close system calls can be seen at the server side here. So we discuss very clearly each system call with their syntax. So before that we want to understand what is the socket function here. So to perform network I/O, the first thing is to process to do call a socket function here, specifying the type of communication protocol, design and protocol family, etc. The syntax for the socket is int socket, int family, int type, int protocol. Int socket, int type, int protocol here. So coming to the family specifies the protocol family and is one of the constants shown in the figure here. As an argument is often referred as a domain instead of a family here. And the socket type is one of the constants, and protocol argument is a argument to the socket function should be set to the specific protocol type found or set to the 0 here to set the system's default for given combination of a family and a type here. So we have the families, different types of families for socket function for the protocol family, that is AF INET. AF stands for address family of internet. AF INET stands for IPv4 protocols, and AF INET 6 stands for IPv6 protocols here. AF local, address family of local for Unix domain protocols. AF root for routing sockets. AF key for the key sockets here. And this chapter does not cover other protocols except IPv4 here. So we have type next in socket function, int family, int type. So these are the families, and the type of the connection is socket stream for TCP stream socket, socket datagram socket for the UDP, socket sequential packet socket, socket draw for the draw socket. And then in the programming we are using only these two types of connections. One is socket stream, one is the socket datagram here. Coming to the protocol, IP proto TCP for TCP protocol, TCP transport protocol, and IP proto UDP for the UDP transport protocol here. IP proto SCTP for the SCTP transport protocol. Coming to the connect system call. Next, in the client side, after socket function, we can see the connect system call here. So connect system call used to TCP used by the TCP client to establish a connection with the TCP server here. So coming to the syntax, int sock fd, int connect, int sock fd, struct socket address, server address, int address length here. So sock fd is a socket descriptor written by the socket function, and the second and third arguments are the pointer to the socket address structure and its size here. The socket address structure must contain the IP address and as well as the port number of the server here. Next, coming to the parameters, sock fd, it is a socket descriptor written by the socket function. Server address is a pointer to the struct socket address that contains the destination of the IP address and the port here. Address length is set to the size of structure socket address here. Coming to the bind function can be seen in the server side in the connection oriented. So the bind function assigns local protocol address to the socket here. The bind function assigns a local protocol address to a socket function here. With the internet protocols, the socket address is a combination of either 32-bit IPv4 address or 128-bit IPv6 address here, along with the 16-bit TCP or UDP port number. This function is called by the TCP server only here. So coming to the parameters, the in syntax first, int bind, int sockfd, struct socket address, my address, int address length here. This call returns 0 if successfully binds to the address, otherwise it returns the -1 on the error here. The parameters we define, sockfd is a socket descriptor returned by the socket function, and the my address, the second argument, is a pointer to the struct address socket address that contains the local IP address and the port here. And the third argument is the size of this address structure here, address length you can say. Okay, you can put your IP address and your port automatically here. Coming to the listen system call, the listen system call can be seen in the server side again after the bind function. The listen function is called by the TCP server and it performs the two actions. First one is the listen function converts an unconnected socket into passive socket, indicating that kernel should accept incoming connection request directed to this socket here. The second argument is to this function specifies maximum number of connections the kernel should queue for this socket here. So coming to the syntax, int listen, int sockfd, int backlog. This call returns 0 on success, otherwise it returns the -1 on the error. Sockfd is a socket descriptor returned by the socket function, and backlog is a number of allowed connections from the client to the server here. Next, coming to the accept system call. Accept system call also can be seen in the server side after the listen function. The accept function is called by the TCP server to return the next completed connection from the front of the completed connection queue. So the syntax for this is int accept, int sockfd, struct socket address, client address pointed to the client address, socket length, and pointed to the address length here. So the parameters, the call returns a non-native descriptor on success, otherwise it returns the -1 on the error here. Sockfd is a socket descriptor written by the socket function, and the client is a pointer to the struct socket address that contains the client IP address as well as the port address here. Address length is set to the size of struct socket address. And coming to the send function. Send function can be seen at both sides, at client side as well as the server side. The send function is to send the data over the socket streams or connected data sockets here. If you want to send data over unconnected datagram sockets, you must use the send to function. You can use write system call to send data. Okay. The syntax for is int write, int sockfd, constant void message int length, pointer message, int length, and int flags here. Message is nothing but is a pointer to the data that you want to send, and length is nothing but length of the data you want to send here in a bytes here. The flag is set to the 0. Similarly, the receive function to receiving the data, or you can also use the read function here as a system call to read the data, and the syntax is similar to the right. Int sockfd void pointer to the buffer, int length, unsigned integer flags here. Buffer is nothing but buffer to read the information into, and length is the maximum length of the buffer, and flag is set to the 0 here. And send to function and receive from function can be used in the connectionless. This send to function is to send the data over unconnected datagram sockets, and the syntax is defined here. In this syntax we have different parameters. One is sockfd, okay, next one is message, the pointer to data be sent, and length is nothing but length of the data in bytes. Flag is nothing but is set to the 0, and 2 is nothing but is a pointer to the structure, socket address structure from the host where data has to be sent. To length, it is set to the size of struct socket address here, and receive from same as a read function or receive function used to receive data from unconnected datagram sockets, and this is a syntax for this. And the parameters you pass in the receive from is buff, sockfd, length, flags, from length. Buff is to read the data information, and length is the maximum length of the buffer. Flags is set to the 0, and from is it is a pointer to struct socket address for the host where data has to be read. From length, it is set to the size of struct socket address here. And last one is a close function here. The close function is to close the communication between the client and server, and the syntax is int sock, int close, int sockfd. This call returns 0 on success, otherwise returns the -1 on the error here. So sockfd is the socket file descriptor written by the socket function here. So these are the system calls in the TCP server side as well as the client side here. If you go for the program, so these are connection oriented, two types of socket life cycles we can see, server side as well as the client side for the connection oriented, and server side as well as the client side for the connectionless here. Struct socket address holds the socket address information for many types of sockets here, and if you go for the program, so first in the server side you want to write the program here. So int sockfd, you want to define the parameters, and new sockfd client length here, and after that you want to define the structure of the socket address in, okay, commonly called as the internet socket address structure, named as a socket address in, defined by including net inet header file here, hash include net inet header file here. So socket address structure require a pointer to a socket address structure as a argument here. This can be passed in two directions, from process to kernel or from kernel to the process here. Each supported protocol should define its own socket address structure here. So names of this socket, this structure begins with the socket address and end with the unique suffix of the each protocol suite here. So after that you want to define the how many bytes you want to send the data from the server to the client or client to server here. The server program, you want to define the socket function, create a socket function socket for the communication, and you want to define the you want to pass the parameters here. One is AFINet, is nothing but domain, or a family, socket stream is a type of the connection, and 0 stands for the protocol, default as a 0 here. So AFINet, address family of internet for IPv4 addresses, and socket stream provides the type of the connection is a connection oriented two-way connection based byte streams here. 0 for default protocol for the socket, depends upon the this protocol depends upon the type of the connection here. If socket is successful, it returns the socket function. If socket is unsuccessful, socket is failed, it returns the 0 here, exists 0. So you want to define the structure here. Serve address SYN family. Okay, serve address SYN family. SYN stands for socket internet family here. AFINet stands for address family. So socket internet family is the IPv4 format here. So AFINet, address family of internet here. So server address SYN address dot s address here, s underscore address, host to network long, in address any. In address any stands for accept the connections from any address from the client. So it can change the address to the client IPv4 address to accept only on the client here. And you want to define the if you define the invalid IP address, it will be unable to decode here. So coming to the bind function, you want to define the host and you want to define the SYN port also, host to network short. So coming to the bind function, sockfd struct socket address, then server address, size of the server address here less than 0. If bind fail, exit 1 and listen system call, then accept system call, then memset, number of bytes to be copied, read, write and close function. Similarly for the client program also, you want to define the sockets function, then you want to define the connect system call, connect for the connecting, making the connection to the server, three-way handshake process, and you want to define the default IP address. If you are running on the same machine, if you are running on a different machine, you can give the IP address and read, write and close the function, close the socket function here. To compile this program, first of all, you want to compile the program of the server, then you want to compile the program of the client here. So to compile the program, you can create the object file cc filename.c space -o, the file name here, and to run the program /server here, whatever file name you are giving. Then you can open the another window and to compile the client, first you compile the server, then compile the client program here. To compile the client program, cc iterative server, and is nothing but file name .c space -o client. After that, client is nothing but object file name, and after that you want to run the program /object file name here. Okay, then you can enter the message, you can receive the message from the server here. Thank you for listening to the session.